Hi, my name's Andy Davis and I'd like to welcome you to this E3D tutorial on xNormal. xNormal is an absolutely fantastic program that bakes a number of maps, and many people have swapped over from the inbuilt renderers in Max and Maya over to xNormal because it's absolutely stunning. It's incredibly fast and you get some incredibly detailed bakes from it. It's a free download, and if you want to download it, just head over to the E3D forum where we've got the xNormal sub forum, and then you just go to official releases. You can get the beta and release candidates, and if you've got any questions, you can ask questions and get some feedback here. In the tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to bake three of the most popular maps. The Ambient Occlusion map, I'm going to show you all the settings for that and the difference between 600 rays and 128 rays, and how increasing the rays increases the detail and the smoothness of the map. I'm going to show you how to bake the Normal map and how to do all that. I'm going to show you how to bake Polypaint without the need of UVs in xNormal. And I'm also going to show you how to set up 3 different ways of baking in xNormal using raycasting, cages and external cage files. So I hope you find the information useful, and let's get started. Okay, the first thing I wanted to do was show you some of the basic xNormal interface, how to use it, how to put meshes in, and show what some of these tabs do and what some of the options do up here. Now, the first thing you'll probably want to go and do in xNormal is actually load meshes up so you can bake something. There's 2 ways to do this. You either right click the slot and select add meshes, which will give you a little pop-up window that you can pick a mesh from, or you can open up a folder and then find a mesh and then drag the mesh in. Now, the high definition meshes slot is for high poly, the low definition mesh slot is for low poly. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab a high poly mesh from the next gen texturing DVD, and then we'll go into low and we'll get our low poly mesh. We'll just grab that one, stick it in there. Now, for options, you don't really want to play around with this too much generally in my experience. The only things I really change are the mesh scale, because Blender exports meshes very, very small in comparison to most other programs. So I generally change this to 5 or so, and you want to do that on both the low poly and the high poly. And the other thing you'll see is the smooth normals. Now, there's 3 options for this. You've got use exported normals, average normals and hardened normals. And basically, use exported normals will use the normals that you've exported from your application. So if you've got smoothing groups or anything like that, it will export the normals that you've defined in your application. Average normal will average all the normals, and hard normals will give you all hard normals. So when you render it out, it would show a faceted mesh. If you did a cylinder, then it would show all the sides of the cylinder, rather than being nice and smooth if you have used exported normals or average normals. So generally I keep this on exported normals because I like the control of defining what my normals will be like in the end. You've got use cage. Now, use cage is the alternative to using a uniform ray distance. Cages are brilliant for most objects. It's worth noting that you can have a cage. Now, to set the cage, you need to go over to the 3D viewer, but I will go over that later on, so you can check this on or off. The maximum frontal ray distance and rear ray distances, you set this, and that will be the maximum that the rays will hit before terminating. So sometimes you need to play with this depending, but it's all mesh specific. You can't, there's no general setting that will work for everything. Sometimes you need to increase this and sometimes you don't. You've got a base texture to bake, and this will bake high poly texture information from something like ZBrush. I know Michael Pavlovich used this in his xNormal tutorial he did for E3D that you can grab over at the free video section. The next thing we want to look at is baking options. Now baking options, this is where you define what file type your mesh will be, what maps you're baking, the size, how much edge padding you want, which renderer you want. Now generally the high definition and low definition, that's all set for what we want to do. So first thing you want to do is you want to put an output file. So to do that, you select this little green icon here, and then we go to a folder that we can put our bakes in. It's worth noting that you can have different formats, but I generally use Targa. Now when you bake a map, it will add a suffix to the end, and this is called NGT. If you bake a normal map, it will bake the normal map out as NGT_normals.tga. And the same with height map and ambient occlusion and whatnot. The size of the map is the final size of the map that you want to use. So generally I use 2048 by 2048, but obviously that will be depending on what I'm baking. Now edge padding, this is the setting that you want to use to define how much bleed you want on the textures. Say if you have a bunch of UV islands and you set this to 8, it will sample each pixel around the edge of the UV island and it will expand it out by 8 pixels. It's basically to stop bitmap errors and things like that. You can't have an amount that is too great on this. It's very easy to have too little, but you can't have too much edge padding, so basically bump this up until you stop getting problems. I generally have this on about 8 or so, but obviously it depends on map size, but you can never have too much. Bucket size is the size of the bucket that xNormal uses when it's rendering. So if you have a 512 map and a 512 bucket, it will render out one big block. If you have it as a 256, it will render out 4 256 blocks for the 512 map, and it will do each one sequentially depending on how many cores you've got or depending on which renderer you're using. Generally it's best to have this on as high as 512, that's fine. There's no real point to having it at 16 because it'll probably render a lot slower, but 512 is generally a good value. Now for renderer, there's two options here. A default bucket renderer basically uses the CPU to do all rendering, and the optics CUDA render that will use a GPU to render. Now you have to have a NVIDIA GPU that is newer than the 8 series, so basically anything 8 series above, you'll be able to use this feature. As long as you've got some recent drivers, you should be good to go. Now for benefits, the default bucket renderer is generally slower but more accurate. I've noticed on the CUDA renderer it is extremely fast, really fast, much faster than the CPU renderer, but every now and again I'll get some errors, but generally, you know, it works most of the time. It's just in some situations the results aren't as good as the default bucket renderer, but that's just because of bugs. The quality of the maps are identical, but this is only an alpha, so this is experimental, so it's to be expected. I will generally use the CUDA renderer because it's much faster, which I'll show you in a while, but if I do get an error I'll just go over to the bucket renderer, so I generally stick this as a default. Anti-aliasing isn't available on the CUDA renderer, but generally to get over this I will bake out at double res and then resize down, which is exactly the same. If you use anti-aliasing, it's a linear increase in the amount of time that it takes to render your map, so generally baking out at double res and then downsizing will give you exactly the same results, but much quicker. So generally I'd stick this on 1, leave it at that. So just change this back. A file overwrite warning, that will give you a warning if you've got a texture of the same name and you're trying to bake it again. It will give you this pop-up that asks you if you're sure you want to do this. This is a really good idea to keep this on, because if you accidentally leave ambient occlusion, for example, and you've got a 2K map and you write over it, then you don't know until it's started to bake, and then you've got to wait until the map finishes out. So no, there's no reason to leave this off. Keep it on, save yourself some headaches. Okay, so Next, we're going to go on to some of the options. I'm only going to go over the ones that I use and what most people will use, I think. The first one is Normal Map. This is a bog standard normal map. You click this little button here and it will pop up with this little dialog box. And you've got a few options. You've got tangent space. If you uncheck this, it will give you an object or world space map. Object space maps are really good. You know, you get some really nice quality, but they're not as versatile as tangent space maps. And most engines use tangent space maps. In fact, I think the only engine that I know of that uses object space is the Normalisation engine. But you know, I generally keep this on tangent space, and you probably want to also. This is your background color. You want to set this to a flat normal color, which is 128, 128, 255. There's some discussion over which color is actually best. Is it 127, 127 to 55, or 128, 128 255? I think the general consensus is that 128, 128 255 is correct. But there's a load of information you can have a look at, and you can decide which is best for you. The swizzle coordinates. Most applications either use two configurations. They will use plus X plus Y plus Z, or they will use plus X minus Y plus Z. Maya uses this configuration here, as does Marmoset engine, and UDK and Max use X plus, Y minus and Z plus. So depending on the engine that you want to be using, you want to make sure this is checked. If you don't bake it out with the correct settings, you just need to flip the green channel in Photoshop of the normal map you bake, and it's exactly the same. But you know, by setting this as to a default, you'll just save yourself some headaches and work later on. So always set this up to what you want to use. I'll just put it back to that there. Okay, the next would be Ambient Occlusion map. It's really good to overlay over a texture, put it as a multiply blend layer, and you get some really nice details, and it's a really quick way to start your texturing off. For settings, raise is the amount of raise that you want to use. 128 is quite low, but it bakes much faster. I generally use something higher than this. I usually put it at around 600 or 700, but we'll leave this like this for now. Uniform gives is a distribution. It will give everything even attention, basically, whereas coating will give more detail around the normals of the mesh. I generally use leave this at uniform. Occluded color, that's the color that when fully occluded the ambient occlusion map will be baked as. Unoccluded color will be this color here. It's usually best to leave these as black or white, though you can change them if you want. Spread angle. Spread angle is a very important setting. If you have it too low or too high, then you will get nasty results. I generally leave this about 150, and those settings between 120 and 160 are acceptable. It goes all the way down to 0.5 and all the way up to 179.5. Basically, it defines how great the area it will sample from. So the smaller the angle, the smaller the distance that it will sample from. I think 150 is a good compromise between good details and broad ambient occlusion. Allow 100% occlusion. Now basically this will allow areas to receive 100% occlusion. This can cause some problems. You leave it on if you want, but if you get some problems you can just uncheck it. Ignore backface hits, just ignores any backface hits. Jitter will add noise to your map, so if you bake out a map that's really clean and you want to add a little bit of noise in there, leave jitter on, but I'm not going to do that. I like leaving jitter off and having nice clean maps. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and bake out one of these maps now. and I will go and set this to a default renderer so we can see the speed improvements, because ambient occlusions, they kill time. Honestly, if you're baking out a massive map, it can take hours and hours and hours, and this is a really good time saver. So we'll go into ambient occlusion and we'll leave this at 128, and we're going to do a test bake so you can see what sort of speed ups you're getting. But one thing we're going to want to do before we do this is set up a cage for our mesh, because if I remember correctly, this mesh works better with a cage. So to do that, you just go to your 3D viewer tab here, and you've got all these options here. You don't need to worry about any of these really, apart from run windowed. So then you click the launch viewer button, which will launch the viewer, and then it will load all the meshes up here. And there's our meshes. Now to navigate around this, it's just the normal WASD controls you have for games, whilst holding down the right mouse button. And W is go forward, S is pan out, and A and D are pan side to side. So what you want to do is, it looks like the problem we've got here is the low poly mesh is being covered by the high poly, which won't give you very good results. So to see the cage and edit it, you just click up here, just click show cage, which will highlight the cage in red. And then to edit the cage, just click edit cage. I mean, you can change the color of the cage to whatever you want to be, but I like it as red. So you've got a couple of options. You've got a selection extrusion and a global extrusion. The selection extrusion will extrude only the vertices that you select. You select a vertex by middle clicking, and then you can use the slider and drag it out to do whatever you want. But I'm not going to need this in this case. So what I'll do is I'll just go to global extrusion, and I will bring the slide to the right until I can't see any high poly left, which is quite a bit. That looks okay. I'll just pan around the back and double check everything. We get a little bit of intersection there, but it won't show in the final map. So now what to do is you want to click save meshes. Now if you save the mesh, it will ask you what you want it to be. So go over here, and we've got SBM or OVB. SBM is a much better format, so we'll just call it NGT for next gen texturing, and then click save. And it asks if you want to automatically assign the saved mesh to the mesh slots, and yes we do, because it saves a step later on. So then you just press escape to get out of that, and then we should, if you notice here, see it's got the new meshes that we've got. This one will want to change, so we'll go over to the high poly, and we will just grab the low poly one, and we'll cut it out and move it to the low poly tab there, and just delete that one. This is just for tidiness really, it's not necessary. Okay, one thing I want to do is change this mesh scale to 5 so it matches the high poly, and then go back into baking options and change from the default bucket renderer to the optics renderer, and we're just going to click generate maps. If you have a notify tile updates on, it will give you a constant update on the progress of the rendering. If you have it set off, it won't. Okay, and that took 52 seconds to render a 2K map at 128 rays, which is pretty fast. What we're going to do is we'll just open up our bake and have a look at it in Photoshop. And you see there's a lot of detail. It's pretty noisy because it's 128 rays, See up here, you've got quite a lot of noise and stuff. To get rid of that, you need to chuck the rays up, which is what we'll do next. And what I'll do is I will copy and then make a new layer in Photoshop, and we'll call that 128 rays. Just close the other one, and we'll bring that up. In the baking options, we'll go to our little green check here, and we'll put this to 600 rays, which is generally the amount that I use. And then we'll click Generate Maps again. Okay, and that's our map done, and it took 277 seconds. Now for 600 rays and a 2K map, that is pretty fast, you know, much faster than the CPU would have been able to do it. So what I'll do is we'll go and open it up, and we'll check the differences. And I'll just copy that over there and rename this one to 600 rays, and then delete what we've got there, and stick that up. And if you notice, the noise that was there is much less, much less, and it's a very good quality map. I think the lowest for production I would use would be 600 rays, as it's a good compromise between quality and speed. It's quite a lot less noisy, and there's a couple of errors here and there, but these can be fixed quite easily. Okay, I'm just going to save this map out here, and we'll call it settings.psd. Okay, the next thing I want to do is show you how to bake normal maps. To do that, we need to come out of Photoshop here, and I want to show you also another way to use cages, because this SBM format has got cage information already on it. So to do that, we need to go to our meshes folder, and then we need to drag our low poly over, uncheck the previous mesh, and then go to our high definition meshes slot, uncheck the mesh, and then go into our high poly meshes over here and drag the high poly in. Now another thing I want to talk about as well is the default mesh scale. If you notice, I changed the default mesh scale here. Well, it's not necessary. What you can do is you can change it here as well. So if you put this as a 5, and then we'll just delete these meshes to show you quickly. So we'll drag the low poly, and if you have a look, see it's already taken the default mesh scale. And then we need to go into our high poly, and then grab the same scene, and it's also taken the default mesh scale. So you can do it either way. Generally, I find it's better to keep this on 5, and then it updates automatically. Okay, once you've done that, we need to go to our low definition meshes, and we're going to add a custom cage. If you can see here, we've got a custom cage mesh that I've made. Now we'll use this as the cage for your mesh, but it has to have identical topology. By identical topology, you can use things like the push modifier, and you can move verts around, but it needs to have exactly the same vert count and UV islands, so you can't mess with those. If you don't have exactly the same topology, it'll just throw up an error and it won't let you continue. Now there's only one way to load a custom cage. If you grab the mesh as normal and you drag it in, it will just start a new mesh here. So what you've got to do is you've got to select your slot here, and then just drag it over so we can see the external cage file. It doesn't matter where you clicked, but right click on the slot and then click browse external cage file, and it will ask you for a cage. So this is the cage we made here, and just click open, and then it throws up a warning about using the same topology. And that's all set. It automatically checks the cage. So then we just need to go to the baking options, and then we need to uncheck ambient occlusion and then check normal map, and then click the options box here. Now these settings here are quite important. Obviously you've got tangent space, which is checked at the moment. If you uncheck it, it will render object space, and this is the background color, so whatever background color you want to use, but it's generally advised to use the 128, 128, 255 flat purple for normal maps. Your swizzle coordinates, now you'll need to change these depending on which application you're using. As they are set now, it's a default for Maya, Marmoset engine, and any id engine that you use. You change the Y to Y minus if you want it for UDK or Max, but so we'll set it like that. It's all this is all fine now. Now also I wanted to show something about anti-aliasing, a little technique. When you're rendering with the CUDA engine, it only renders 1x AA, but if you change it to the default bucket renderer, it gives you options for 2 and 4 times as well. Now these are very, very good quality, but the problem is they take an awful long time. So what you can do, a neat little trick, is if you render at 1x AA, and then you increase your map size to double, and then you resize it in Photoshop, it will give you 4x AA, which is absolutely fantastic. But don't forget to change the edge padding to double. It's much, much quicker than using the anti-aliasing options here. Okay, so we'll give that a go, and we'll just click generate maps. Okay, so you see it didn't take very long at all to render 13 seconds, but it's much, much longer if you render it with 4x AA. So what we'll do is we'll just close that down, and we'll go into our bakes, and we'll just open up the normal map. Now there's a couple of errors that you can see, but this is due to overlapping geometry and intersecting geometry. Ideally you would bake this exploded for normal maps, but generally the normal map, it looks okay. Now if we go to something like this area here, you can see the aliasing, which is obviously a massive problem because it can make your normals look really, really nasty in game. So the best way to fix this, as I mentioned before, is if you go to image, and then image size, and then half the size of the map. Click OK. Now if we zoom in to roughly the same area, you can see we've got 4x AA here. Now one thing that's important to do when you've done this is to renormalize your normal map so that all the normals have a length of 1, because if not, it can cause scintillation and other artifacts. So to do that, luckily xNormal comes with a bunch of Photoshop filters. Now what I'll do is I'll just duplicate that, and we'll call this one base, and we'll call this one normalized. What we'll do is we'll just go to filter, and then go to your xNormal, and then just click normalize normal map, and you can see there is a change there. So this is where the normals are of different values, and now everything is set to 1. So that normal map's ready to go. So what we'll do is we'll just save this out, and we'll call it normal, and save it as a PSD. The next thing I wanted to show you was how to bake Polypaint in xNormal. In the low poly character DVD, Adam Schumann showed you how to bake Polypaint using the base texture to bake feature in xNormal, using the UVs of the high poly to bake it across to the low poly. In ZBrush now, you can store Polypaint data in your OBJ file, and the xNormal now recognises that, and it can bake it directly without any UVs, which really, really helps if you've got a problem with file sizes, because if you have a massive character with millions and millions and millions of polys, then when that has UVs, it can become really big. 2 gigabytes isn't unheard of. You know, obviously that can become a massive problem if you've got file space restrictions. So the way we're going to do this is we'll just go into xNormal again. We'll just close this down, and we'll switch off normal map here. We'll go to our high definition meshes, and we will add the E3D character Polypaint OBJ. And just uncheck the other one, and then go to the low definition meshes and click low poly, and then we want to add our low poly character, which is the it's a slightly modified version of the low poly character in the low poly character DVD. I've just removed some of the parts. The basic mesh is exactly the same. Now, we're not going to use a cage for this. We're going to use ray casting because I wanted to show a way to do that. As you can see here at the moment, the maximum frontal and rear ray distances, this dictates the maximum distances that the rays will travel. You know the settings, you can either change them manually, or you can go into the tools here, and then we've got this little cool ray distance calculator, and what it does is it will sample everything automatically for you. So to do this, you just click go and then just wait. You usually want to leave this running for, you know, a couple of minutes if you can, or until the values, you know, remain the same for a while. Okay, I think that'll do nicely, and then once you want to stop it, just click stop. And a new feature in xNormal that's been implemented recently is if you click copy results, it will automatically take these results and place them into the ray distance in the low definition meshes slot, whereas before it didn't, and it was quite a pain. You had to copy it on Notepad and then enter them manually. But now if you click copy results, and we go to our low poly, you can see that everything's being added here. Sometimes it's advisable to increase these by a little tiny bit, so I'm just going to bump these up to 39 and 2.1, and then we need to go back to our baking options here, and we need to change this back to 2048 and the bucket size to 8. Now we need to change an option here, go all the way down to the bottom and see where it says bake the high poly vertex colors, and check that and click the options box, and ask you what background color you want to use. So I'm going to pick black. Then we need to go to our high definition meshes slot, and then right over the side here where it says ignore per vertex color, so we just uncheck that, check that everything is as it should be, and then okay, and then click generate maps. Okay, and then we'll just have a look at our map, and you can see there's a few intersections and things, and a couple of errors, but these can be fixed by using a cage. Like I said before, ideally you want to use a cage for everything, but I wanted to show the multiple ways of doing everything if I could. Yeah, so it's turned out really nice. It's really good, really high quality. All the details are present, and it's a really big time saver as well, because you don't have to worry about UVs, which can be a bit of a pain to add, you know, once you've already done a high poly character, because they're so dense. Another thing I wanted to show you was how to get edge padding. If you've forgotten to put it on, or for whatever reason you couldn't use it, what we'll do is we'll go to xNormal, and we'll just call this one Polypaint no edge padding, and we'll turn the edge padding to 0, and then click generate again, and it will render the map with no edge padding. Okay, so that's rendered, and we'll just open it up, and you can see there's quite a big difference. If we overlay this on top of this one here, there's quite a big difference in the one with no edge padding. So we'll just grab this and select the alpha channel, and then double click it to promote it, add a mask, then apply the layer mask. So we've just got our alpha channel here. Then you just need to go to filter and get an xNormal and then dilation, and it'll come up, and you type in how many pixels you want. So say you want 8, we'll click update and then click do it, and it will dilate everything perfectly for you. So we'll just grab that and go over to here, and as you can see, it's identical. So it's really good to get you out of a fix if you need it. Hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and hope you've learned something, and I'll see you soon.